Okay. Thank you very much for coming. I'm very, very pleased to announce the successful conclusion of a long and arduous negotiations process between the MTA and the Subway Supervisors Association. A lot of you will recall last year, it was actually March 26, 1984, that the MTA chairman, Bob Kiley, announced a three-part management reform proposal for the New York City Transit Authority. He called at that time for a so-called broad banding of the first and second level supervisory titles, a reclassification of the third and fourth level titles to non-competitive managerial titles, and the exclusion of TA supervisors and managers from the collective bargaining process. Well, with the support of Mayor Koch and the City Civil Service Commission, the MTA was able to achieve the first part of the reform package. The second part was achieved when the State Civil Service Commission, with the governor's support, approved the creation of 1,189 new management positions. The third part was the more controversial one. I thought, and said so at the time, that it ought to be a matter not for legislation but for negotiation between the MTA and the Supervisors Association. I asked Chairman Kiley and the union to negotiate the item. I asked Tom Hartnett, the State Director of Employee Relations, to help in the process. Both sides, incidentally, welcomed his participation and were grateful for it. Well, those negotiations took almost a year, but they're concluded now, and they have allowed us to reach an agreement that's satisfactory to both sides, subject to the approval of the MTA board and the membership of the union, and that above all brings us closer to the goal that we all seek, and that is better subway service in the city of New York. And the outcome didn't just happen, and it wasn't a matter of luck. It was achieved by commitment and persistence and by reasonableness on the part of the parties that were involved, by a willingness on all sides to try to find a solution that was fair as well as practical, by intelligent people with different points of view, different immediate interests, going about the sometimes very hard work of compromising with integrity and common sense. I'm personally pleased because, as you recall, I had publicly expressed my confidence in the possibilities of negotiation and had urged these negotiations as a more practical route than going directly to the legislature. I was counting on at the time on the intelligence and fairness of the union leaders, of the MTA people, and of our own Tom Hartnett. And because they were, in fact, at least as intelligent and at least as fair as I thought they were, it's all worked out. And I'd like to thank Bob Kiley and Bruce McIver for their leadership role in reaching this agreement. I also want to thank John Michael and Leonard Joyner and Morse Genk and George Hayes, who represented the Supervisors Union, and they also deserve our sincere thanks. Two other names that oughtn't to be forgotten today. Barry Feinstein, who was head of PEC, the Public Employees Conference, and last year, when I appeared there with Tom Hartnett, Barry was not happy with the MTA position and said so. I asked him to help us in putting together the parties and to begin the negotiation process, and he, as was appropriate since he was president of the conference, did take a hand, and I'm grateful to him because it proved to be helpful. Sid Schwartz, you'll recall, who was first the Management and Productivity Director here and then the first Inspector General, you recall his report, in which he said that he thought there was a chance that this could be negotiated and encouraged that. So all of these people, I think, deserve our thanks. And finally, to be parochial about it, a special thanks to my own Director of Employee Relations, again, Tom Hartnett, and to Nancy Hodes and to Joe Bress, because they did a wonderful, wonderful job. The demands of their normal duties are hard enough, but they took on this extra assignment with enthusiasm, with skill, and thank goodness with success. What all of this says, I think, and you're going to hear now from the chairman, Bob Kiley of the MTA, and from John Michael himself from the union side, filling in some details for you, but what all of this means to me is that the idea of family does work, and I know I say it over and over, but we should say it over and over because it's that important a principle. The kind of intelligent synergism that you saw here, which is not common in this country. I mean, there aren't many agreements like this one that you can point out because there aren't many groups of people that have the kind of intelligence and skill and maturity that these people all together had. You put the state, you put the unions, you put management, all together, you ask them to be reasonable, and reasonableness can work wonders. That's what family means. This is a especially happy day for us here in the state. Bob Kyler.
Thank you, Governor, and my appreciation for your help and the help of your staff, you particularly, Tom. Let me quickly spell out some of the features of the agreement. John, you kick me not too hard if I get off base.
His attorney is right behind.
Right, gotcha, Martha. Essentially, the union will continue to represent approximately 3,000 supervisors. These supervisors will have the ability to state their preferences for job assignments, locations, hours of work, etc. But the authority will retain the right to make job assignments wherever and whenever they see fit. Needless to say, the preferences will be taken into very serious account. Approximately 430 supervisors will come out of the union under this agreement, and in addition, there'll be some 80 new positions created in the Rapid Transit Command Center, which will not be represented by the union. We've also agreed that the Transit Authority will upgrade the health insurance benefit of each of the employees represented by the Supervisors Association. There will be a $200 or so increase of per employee payments to the welfare fund per year. Sorry, per employee per year.
Make it per week.
Right. We've also agreed that since the numbers are a little bit uncertain, since the authority is going through reorganization, that we have stipulated that the union representation will not fall below the figure of 2,500 during the life of the next contract, which begins, I believe, on the June 1st, for a period of time which will still be determined. The current contract ran for 3 years. And we've also agreed that when and if membership should drop below 3,000 at any point during this 3-year period, that the Transit Authority would make up the difference in the loss of dues revenue. And finally, the union has agreed to drop all administrative and legal challenges to the reform program itself. John, if I've overlooked anything or misspoke, why don't you set the record straight? I'd simply like to conclude by saying the negotiations, the year that we spent, or the 10 months that we spent negotiating and arguing about what the solution ought to be, were sometimes painful. It was certainly protracted, but I would like to say that I've found my association with John to be, obviously, to have been fruitful. He's, as the governor pointed out, he's both persistent and reasonable, and I think that's been very important in getting us to this point. John?
Thank you, Bob. At the outset, I would also like to thank Governor Cuomo, his very able staff, Tom Hartnett, Tom's able executive assistant, Nancy Hodes, and their counsel, Joe Bress, for making this agreement possible. Bob has told you basically everything that's in that agreement. I would also like to indicate that this agreement negates the need for putting into effect the third point in his 3-point program. Obviously, we're going to have a supervisory union on the property. We are going to continue to represent civil service employees, and I'm happy about that. We've made concessions regarding jobs jurisdictions, and I'm sure, as Bob indicated, these will be carried out in an effective manner since we can still express a preference of assignment by seniority in these areas. I think Bob is correct and will not overstep his managerial prerogatives and be arbitrary and capricious. I really don't see any great changes in this area as a result. This agreement also puts an end to the war and the confrontation that's been going on for the past year. Hopefully it will establish labor peace and cooperation, and I think this is the only way to go. only through peace and cooperation can we restore the status that this system once had. And that status was that we were considered by the entire world, and I want to indicate that they were my supervisors that ran the railroad at that time, and the system was the safest, the most efficient mass urban transportation system in the entire world. And I think with this agreement, it's a giant step in the right direction to restore that status. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. Tom, do you want to say what?
I don't have a great deal to add, other than it was a long process. It started a long time ago. I would also like to express my thanks to Barry Feinstein, the chairman of PEC, who brought us together first at our request to commence these discussions. They were long and difficult, but I think both sides were reasonable and flexible and creative. Creative in terms of looking at different ways of dealing with the issues and problems that the management on the TA were facing, and how we could best accommodate or come to some resolution for those problems, and still wrestle with this very difficult representation issue. I take my hat off to Bob Kiley and to John Michaels for doing a hell of a job. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Adam?
You would estimate on how much this is going to cost, excuse me, the TA, in terms of the increased benefits and the potential cost of making up the union dues if it falls below 3,000?
When the economic adjustments come into full effect on an annualized basis, we calculate that the total cost will be in the neighborhood of $1.5 million per year.
And do you think, now that you have all three parts of your original proposal in place,
It doesn't have,
say what?
it doesn't have the three parts.
Let me rephrase that question then. Have you accomplished the goal that you were seeking when you made your announcement of whatever it was last March?
Yes, I'm more than satisfied that we've achieved the goals, which were, well, it means that the top administration will have in place a management right down to the first level of supervision that's fully invested in the goals, not only of the organization at large, but in each individual department. It means that they can be held accountable, that they can be rewarded on the basis of their performance, and that is going to make a great difference in our ability to achieve the ambitious goals that were set forth in the operating budget for 1985. So I think as we move into 85 and as these changes continue to occur, that is, the people moving into positions that have either been newly created or for which there is new flexibility, we hope that that's all going to be behind us by mid-1985, and that as we move into 1985, riders are going to notice visible changes in subway service. I hasten to add that there are no rabbits coming out of a hat here, that these are essential ingredients and the necessary precondition for real change to happen. It will still take time, but I think now it's possible to approach these problems systematically. We're going to get some momentum going. You're going to have cleaner cars, more reliable cars, and a better service. So I think today is really a landmark day.
Was this a decision for you and your union that was based on a need to keep your union alive, to allow you to survive? Or was it a judgment on your part that in fact the TA really needed flexibility you're giving them to 300 or 400 of your people in order to make the subways better?
Well, it was both. We are, I want to indicate, a very responsible union. We always respond to the needs of the ridership, and we recognize that Mr. Kiley needed some discretion in certain areas, and we conceded that. I think the big thing here is we've established a state of labor relations that hasn't existed for the last year, and that's the only way you can get productivity. We represent the monitors of productivity. And the only way we can get that productivity that Bob seeks and that I also seek is by cooperation.
In the negotiations that went on, what alternative was suggested to you that might occur if you didn't reach some agreement with the TA?
Well, the alternative was simply that the war would continue, and someday down the road, the matter would be decided in PERB and in the courts.
Was there any threat of legislation that could be used
There was
against?
also that. I was confident that that wouldn't be a factor.
It's a threat by whom? You want to explain?
That was a threat by the authority, yes.
Yeah.
But I was confident that that wouldn't be a factor, and we've always taken the posture as Governor Cuomo has, that these matters could be settled over negotiations, and they should not be brought to the state legislature.
Lest there be any impression that the union was kind of bludgeoned into submission, the only indication of legislation was an aspiration on the part of the MTA. I, of course, was never interested in it in the beginning and said so. I said, you can't have it unless you try negotiating. And I didn't hear any legislative leader come rushing forth saying, we'd pass a statute. So I don't think it would be fair to cast the union in a position of saying, well, they were intimidated. You started your question by saying, was this to save the union? I don't know what threat there was against the union. Now, that's just to keep the perspective here. But certainly there was no discussion from the governor's office with the union concerning the possibility of legislation. They arrived at a conclusion that they thought was good and reasonable and just, and that's why it's such a signal event. They didn't have to be commandeered or threatened or intimidated into it. Okay? Yes, sir.
The $200 contribution, what exactly will that mean for your members? In other words, does that mean more medical care or more?
$200 contribution basically will keep us solvent for the next couple of years. I don't see any increases in benefits. We'll have to see how it works out, but basically we need this money to remain solvent over the next couple of years.
The other alternative would have been either diminish benefits for your members or to raise whatever fees they pay to the fund to keep us on.
Or not make the deal. That's another alternative. Yeah.
And there's no question that in one manner or another, this health thing would resolve itself, because presently we receive the lowest contribution on the property. It would have been rectified, and I don't consider that any, it had no input in the resolution of this agreement.
Okay. Fred?
Mr. Michael, just a quick question. How tough do you think, if it's going to be tough at all, to sell this agreement to your membership?
Well, I'm very confident that we'll sell it to the membership, because where are we? You know, the first 2 steps of the 3-point program were already passed. We had no input into that. What we have here is a situation where we're negating a need by mutual agreement to implement the 3rd step of the 3-point program. And we're going to remain in business. We're going to reestablish a state of labor relations that hadn't existed before. And I'm extremely confident that I have an intelligent membership, and then that they'll realize this and ratify it come February 11th.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, not having to do with this, or all, okay, yeah, great. John, thank you. Well done. Thank you. Well done. Counselor, well done. The MTA hasn't passed on that yet either. I don't, well, he says no.
Are you going to attempt, or what are you going to do in the session of the legislature to try to raise the drinking age again to 21? What's your prognosis?
We handed up the bill yesterday to raise the purchasing age to 21. We'll, of course, be discussing it with the leaders. I will, of course, continue to make the case for it. The case is different this year than it was last year because of the addition of 3 elements or so. The statistics are even more compelling this year because you've had incidents since last year. But more than that, the President has changed his view, or at least announced a view in favor of 21. A law has been passed that I don't like, that menaces us by suggesting that we might lose as much as $150 million in highway aid if we don't go to 21. I say I don't like that because I don't like it as a tactic by the federal government, but there is no denying it's going to have some kind of effect, either to persuade some legislators to agree to 21 or have a perverse effect that will turn some legislators off, but it's a new factor. And the third, I think, factor that was so evident yesterday is the kind of inexorable push to 21 by all the states around us, even ones that previously, as recently as last year, had indicated a reluctance. Vermont. When Governor Snelling was in Vermont, well, he changed his mind near the end, but Madeline Kunin is very much for going to 21. Bill O'Neill has now announced yesterday in Connecticut he's going to 21. Jersey's at 21. Pennsylvania. Massachusetts, that had repealed going to 19, or had vetoed going to 19 under Dukakis, is now going to 21. So we will be left as the only state in the region at 19, and what you're finding now on the southern tier, the Pennsylvania people who come over for a drink, especially on the weekends, 1 out of 10 accidents on the weekends involve a young person, 19 to 21, gets killed or injured. I mean, it's an extraordinary statistic. Now, we failed last year, and I regretted that very much. We came closer than people thought in the beginning. You recall the count in the beginning was, I don't remember, 35, 40 away, and we only missed by 6 or 7. I'm hoping that the additional evidence, the additional time to think, and these changing factors will change the enough minds so that we can get it past the Assembly. I always thought it was a relatively easy push in the Senate. So I'm not too concerned about the Senate, and Frank Padovan indicates to me that he thinks it will pass in the Senate. The Assembly is where we lost. The Assembly is where we'll have to try again. I will be speaking to leadership about it.
The federal law is being challenged by South Dakota, and I don't know, perhaps other states. Looking at that factor in isolation, do you think that it would be wise for the legislators to delay and see how that is resolved?
No, David, for a lot of reasons. First, if we're right, then the delay costs you lives and injuries.
Just looking at that factor in
All right,
isolation.
okay. Number 2, I think the factor is irrelevant, and that's my position. I'm not asking people to vote for the 21-year-old purchasing age because the federal government is threatening us with $150 million. I don't like that. I would have felt better about their passing a 21-year-old purchasing age bill for the whole nation. That would have at least had a kind of intellectual integrity to it. But I don't like this indirect intimidation. And that's not the reason for voting for it. The reason for voting for it is that the whole region's going to have it, and it will save lives, and it will cut down on injuries, and all the statistics make that case clear. Let me remind you of something. Governor Tom Kean of New Jersey, Governor Mario Cuomo of New York, Governor Mike Dukakis of Massachusetts were all governors, and maybe there were others, who resisted this move in the beginning. When we went from 18 to 19, I was lieutenant governor, and I was asked about it, and I said, it's not my kind of thing. I don't like those intrusions, and you'll have to show me. Tom Kean took exactly the same position. Mike Dukakis vetoed a bill, and they've shown us, and we've looked at the evidence. And I've been studying evidence all of my life, and nothing proves without any possible reservation. But this is as strong a case as I've ever seen statistically. And that's the way a Republican Tom Kean feels, and a Republican Dick Thornburgh feels. That's the way women like Madeline Kunin feel, and men like DePrady of Rhode Island, the new governor. Every governor feels the same way. The whole Congress of the United States feels that way. The president feels that way. Groups of parents know it. I mean, it is a universal proposition now. Are there dissents? Of course there are dissents. But the overwhelming view of the evidence is compelling, to put it mildly. I think, did I miss somebody here, John?
Governor, in your meeting with Frank Padovan, did the senator ask you to change any tactic in lobbying for the bill this year?
No, he didn't even mention the tactics.
Are you working with him in some different way to...
It's my senator that sit on the pattern.
And with your friend, do you think, is there any new strategy you can...
No.
Well, say, for instance, having the Senate pass it first. Did the senator indicate that that would be
I didn't talk to him about that. And I don't have any preference. I don't care who goes first as long as it works well. And I don't, you know, I think really the direction should come from the leaders. And I'll talk to the leaders first. I don't plan on doing anything different than I did last year, except maybe do it more clearly. I apparently didn't communicate as well as I should have last year. I'll try harder.
Question on the federal home energy assistance program. The other day, you had a press conference with Joe Kennedy and made a fanfare over the $250,000 from the Citizens Energy Corporation. But yet the administration is still fighting in court to keep that $18 million from HEAP. Isn't there a contradiction there?
No, of course not. The $18 million we're using for poor people. The Citizens Energy money is coming from the private sector. A bright, intelligent leader comes forward and says, I have an idea where we can add to the government pot $250,000. That's a moment to celebrate, and we did. But the HEAP money is not a denial of money. The federal government, as we read the law, says you can use it here or you can use it there, and you can make your best judgment as to which people need it more. And we're putting the money not for non-need, for people who we think need it more. Now, there's another group of people who differ in their assessment of where the true need is. So there's no contradiction. We applauded Joe Kennedy for being a private citizen with a private idea that supplements the federal efforts. And that's, if it were $2,500, it would have been a moment to celebrate. And I must tell you, the amount isn't terribly relevant. Over $250,000 is a lot of money.
Well, when you compare what $250,000 will help in home energy assistance to what $18 million would help
Yeah,
across
but
the
you'd be
state.
denying somebody the use of that money, David. That money's not floating free.
But that money
money's
was
going to other
earmarked,
poor-
wasn't that money earmarked for
That's
home
the-
energy assistance?
That's the judgment of the court to make. That's the whole question legally. We understand that there was a certain provision that was deliberately built in to give us the option to meet an even greater need with the money. And remember, this is not a question of taking X million dollars away from a good purpose. Not at all. We read the law to say, look, that good purpose, supplementing money that they use for heating, or another good purpose, even more desperate people. And you make the judgment, State of New York. That's the way we read it. We're not taking the money and giving it to businessmen. We're not taking the money and making it a tax cut. We're giving it to other poor people. Now, if we're not free to make that judgment, the court will tell us and we'll live with the law.
Didn't you return something like $21 million to the federal government last year on that program? And I wonder what kind of a message that sends to Washington if they're looking to
No,
cut.
that's not accurate. Dick Ottinger said that once on C-SPAN, I think, and we cleared it up. You know. Hank, can you fill us in?
There was no money returned to the federal government. It was a carryover into the next year, according to the pattern of expenditures for the local
So it
communities.
wasn't unspent money that could have gone to help people heat their homes?
That was a carry forward.
Unspent though, right? There was money available last year that was not spent to heat homes.
In terms of the actual expenditure at that time, we have commitments, and those commitments are built right into the budget for the program in the subsequent years.
Was it unspent last year? Was it available last year to spend for heating homes?
Well, before, Hank, you answered, a lot of money was available to be spent last year that wasn't spent. It was homeless money that we didn't get spent. That's the whole argument that Bob Hayes is making. You had that money for homeless and you didn't spend it. That's right, because we had to approve a contract, et cetera, et cetera. It's not because we chose not to spend it. So let me finish with Dave, okay?
Well, that was the question, whether that money, if the message that you were sending to Washington, if you're not spending the money that they're sending to New York, one of the coldest states with with the most poor people, is that the wrong message to be sending to Washington, which is looking to cut programs like that?
Truthfully, I don't want to be cynical about it. It's not going to make any difference what message I send to Washington. They're about to cut us and cut us deep, and they're not waiting for any encouragement. You're about to get clobbered, and I've been saying that for a year. And believe me, if I were to stand here and if I were to fall on my knees here and plead with them to do the right thing, they're not going to do it. That's so clear now that it's unarguable. So it's not a question of delivering messages, although I wouldn't want to be ambiguous in what I say to them. I don't think it's relevant, the message. Yeah.
We were talking about the drinking age a couple of minutes ago.
Excuse me, may I just correct you just for precision's sake? It's the purchasing age. Okay.
Talking about the purchasing age a couple of minutes ago. And there's a push on in some of the western states to raise the speed limit, at least on interstate highways above 55. Do you have a position on that?
We don't have that movement here, although I'm glad you raised the question of the 55 mile per hour. When you hear this argument, isn't this an intrusion on our liberty, telling us we have to wear a seatbelt or can't drink until we're 21? That's right, it's like 55 miles an hour. Or a traffic light, you know. So it's another case where society has said, look, it's reasonable to make these regulations and to confine your conduct for the good of all of us. That's what I see the 21-year-old purchasing age as, and that's what I see the seatbelt as. No, we don't have a move here to change 55.
Governor, you heard about the police protest that's possible?
Say, Bill?
You heard about the police protest possible tonight at Mayor Whalen's
Yes.
fundraiser. Would that deter you from attending, or would you address the policemen as you go
Address
through
the policemen. They didn't ask me to address them. I'm going to go to Tom's party, and I'll do what I always do in situations like that. If there are people who want to talk to me, I'd be pleased to talk to them. I always do.
One other question on Albany politics is the apparent removal of Polly Noonan as vice chairman of the state committee. Was she removed, or did she step
Not,
down?
well, I didn't you know, I wasn't there, but I did talk to some people who spoke to Polly after it occurred to make it very, very clear that if she had wanted to remain and needed someone to endorse her effort to remain, the governor would have been pleased to support her. She was very good to me. She was a close ally and colleague of Mayor Corning, who was even better to me. And I feel a deep sense of gratitude and loyalty to her, and so I sent the message, if you'd like that seat and you need someone to be your advocate, the governor would personally be pleased to advocate for you. So she got that message from the best possible source.
She did not communicate
No.
to you?
She said she's content. I said, she's content, that's good enough for me. She's a friend of mine.
Speaking of friends of yours, Governor, are you going to seek the ouster of Joe Krangle as Erie County
No.
Democratic Chairman?
Can we go back to Keith for a minute, David's question on $18.5 million that was used the first year?
You know, I'd rather you talk to Hank when we're through. He can give you all the details, because it is a matter of numbers, and I would want you to get all the details right. Lisa?
On the energy issue again, you have proposed an increase in the welfare allowance or equivalent to help the low-income people deal with energy needs. Yesterday, or the day before, the Energy Association said that if you really wanted to affect the energy bills of the poor, you would eliminate the gross receipts tax. New York utilities, they say, are taxed at twice the rate of other utilities in other states, and that cost just gets passed on to the poor. They argue that the poor pay a disproportionate portion of their income in energy bills.
Yeah, well, you know, it's an argument that was made. We chose this route because it's more direct, and we're surer of it. I wish we had enough money to do both.
Which route did you choose? I mean, the Kennedy route, is that an alternative?
No,
or the
you talk about
12?
the 10%? Yeah.
On that same issue, if you're going to argue to the feds that the poor need more money for heating, for energy, why is it that we're not spending all the heat money?
Because you have another federal program that says you can have this money, spend it for heating, or for an even more severe need, if you want to spend 10%.
I'm not talking about the 18.5, I'm talking about the money that was spent last year.
But you want to talk to Hank about that, okay? Because I think the confusion, I think the confusion gets into the numbers. For example, some of you believe that the money wasn't spent. Hank can explain to you that it wasn't lost, but it gets to be a matter of numbers, and I'd prefer you deal with him.
We're talking about coal people, aren't we? People with-
Yeah, and you can talk to Hank about it.
Well, you're appealing the court decision, Governor. Do you see that as an issue related to
Which
separation?
court decision, John?
This would be on the 18 million and the decision to appeal the state Supreme Court decision. Is that an appeal based on a separation of powers argument that the court should
No,
not
the
be?
reading of the statute, the reading of the act. You know, either we're right or we're wrong, and if we're wrong, they'll tell us. I mean, I'm a great believer in doing it according to the law. And if we're right, we read it one way, they read it another way. And it's very simple to tell us. It's like the wine cooler bill. You know, I read the Constitution one way, Judge Briant reads it another. If the court says it's unconstitutional, it'll be unconstitutional. All we're doing is using the process the way a citizen does. Come on.
Get back to the heating issue for a minute. It seems to me what you're going to tell the feds is that we need more money to give to the poor to keep them warm, and yet on the other hand, we're not spending money that's available to us to keep the poor warm. Isn't there some...
No, the money that's available to us in the program is to keep the poor warm and to do other things that are even more important for 10%. That's the program. So let me answer you. So what I'm saying to the government is, Mr. Government, you gave us money to keep the poor warm and to do other things that are even more desperate needs because you don't give us enough overall for welfare. So we're keeping the poor warm and we're meeting those other more desperate needs, and now I need more money to keep them warm. Now, what is their response? Well, no, ignore those more desperate needs and meet the need for warmth. And I'm saying then you're leaving out the more desperate needs.
Isn't it the blue smoke and mirrors that you talk about, though? I mean, this is money that's being rolled over.
Right, but then you're not understanding me if all you see is smoke, because these are very simple ideas. You have money for heat and money for more desperate needs than heat.
But you had money for heat, and you rolled it over. You didn't spend it there.
Because it was a more desperate need.
What, save it for the next year?
I think you better talk to Hank, okay? Yeah.
Governor, still on heat, but not on numbers. On policy, it has been the policy of this administration to routinely take the maximum 20% out of heating.
And use it for other needs.
More desperate needs, including the
Our
operation
judgment.
of the State Office of Aging, the central staff and central operation
He
of
can
that.
give you all the figures. You know, he'll give you the figures where it's been. You wouldn't want me to make up the numbers.
I think Bob was actually asking about the propriety of
Well,
using.
if you get the figures down in your head and you see what the money is spent on in aging and what aging does with it, then you'll be able to make a judgment as to whether or not it's reasonable to say this is a more desperate need. Now, that's the judgment we make. We're not spending it on luxuries. We're not spending it to pay for other than needy people. It's a judgment as to which people to take care of, which is the more severe need. Now, we make that judgment because we thought the federal government allowed us to make the judgment. Question is, did they or didn't they? They're suing, saying, no, it had to go to just this category of people. We'll see. If they're right, then we'll live by it.
Governor, that's not what the court case is about. The court case is about using federal money to substitute for state funds in the home energy.
Well, that's what the charge is.
part of the welfare.
Well, that's what the charge is.
And that,
Well, that's what the charge is. But now we'll see what the conclusion is.
you said at the time that you would not do that again when the case was filed, but
I don't remember what I said. I really don't. I mean, you'd have to show me. Yeah.
On another issue, how do you feel about the appointment of Joseph Bellicosa, professor at Albany Law School?
Was he appointed?
Well, he's supposed to be today at noon.
Did somebody announce that?
That's what he understands.
That I would. They don't consult me on those things.
How would you feel if that's who is appointed today?
Chief judge has the right to make the appointment. I know Bellicosa, I like him, I made him the chairman of my sentencing commission. If it means he's not gonna be chairman of the sentencing commission, I'm not happy about it happening right now. Not yet.
One last question, Mr. Governor. In the current issue of Rolling Stone magazine.
Rolling Stone.
There's a profile of Tim Russert, former counselor. And in it says that Russert made Cuomo a household name in America. I wonder if you accept that kind of characterization.
I accept it.